Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name's Maddie and today I'm going to dive into a story that is very close to home for me. While I was researching this true crime case, I realised that he was a lot closer than I actually thought he was. I knew he worked around the areas where I lived, but it turns out he worked in areas where I live. And I thought it would be a great place to start. So without further ado, let's dive into the case of Peter Sutcliffe, otherwise known as the Yorkshire Ripper. Peter Sutcliffe was born on the 2nd of June 1946 in Bingley, which is in the West Riding of Yorkshire. He was born to a Catholic working class family. He was considered a bit weird at school and was a bit of a loner, and he didn't have many friends. So it isn't surprising that he left school at the age of 15. After that, he started taking on menial jobs, two of which were working in cemeteries as a gravedigger. After that, he started to pay prostitutes and sex workers, and he actually started using them very frequently. This was the start of his hatred for women, when a sex worker actually conned him out of money. After that, he stopped using them and he began to despise women. However, in February in 1967, he met Sonia, who he ended up marrying just over 10 years later. In 1977, they bought their first house in Bradford. However, we're going to take it back a little bit to 1969, where he had his first reported attack on a woman. He ended up finding the woman who conned him out of money and decided to take revenge. Him and his friend Trevor were driving in Trevor's van, where he saw Sonia. He asked his friend to stop and he jumped out and followed her. He ended up following the sex worker into a garage and hit her over the head using a stone that was inside a sock. Peter Sutcliffe ended up referring to this incident in his confession. I'm going to read to you what he said. He said, "I got out of the car, went across the road and hit her. The force of the impact tore the toe off the sock and whatever was in it came out. I went back to the car and got in it." After he got in the car, he told his friend Trevor to drive off really quickly, which was a bit suspect as Trevor didn't actually know what happened. When the police did come to the scene of the crime, he did admit that he did hit her. However, he only said he hit her with his hand. The police then dropped the case as the woman did not want to press charges. Sutcliffe then committed his second assault in 1975 in Bradford. On the 5th of July, he attacked a woman called Anna Rogulski. He followed her while she was alone at night. He hit her over the head and then proceeded to attack her stomach with a knife. He was actually disturbed by a neighbour who came to see if she was okay, and Anna ended up surviving this, which is very surprising as he hit her over the head with a hammer and she was unconscious for quite a while. In August, he actually committed the same offence to a woman called Olive Smith. He again followed her alone at night, hit her over the head with a hammer, and began to use the knife on her stomach. However, this time he did start attacking her bottom with the knife as well. Again, Sutcliffe was disturbed by someone who came out to see what was going on, and Olive actually did end up surviving this as well. However, even though both women did survive, they had extensive emotional trauma after this. They ended up going to therapy for depression and anxiety. On the 27th of August the same year, he ended up attacking a 14-year-old girl. Her name was Tracy Brown. He followed her down a country lane when she was walking alone and hit her over the head 5 times. He ended up seeing the lights of an oncoming car and he did leave before he could do anything else to poor Tracy. Tracy did survive, but she did require extensive brain surgery after the attack. After all of these assaults, he did then escalate to murder. And on the 30th of October 1975, he attacked a mother of 4 called Wilma McCann. She was struck over the head with a hammer again, which seems to be his way of rendering these women unconscious. She was then struck over 15 times with a knife in her head, her chest, her neck and her abdomen. An extensive search was done by the police after this attack and over 1,000 people were questioned. However, they did not question Peter Sutcliffe and he went off scot-free after this attack. Unfortunately, after this attack, one of Wilma's daughters actually ended up committing suicide in 2007 due to depression of the death of her mother. It wasn't until January the next year, in 1976, that Peter Sutcliffe would attack again. Hello, baby. His attack was on a woman called Emily Jackson, who was 42 years old, who lived in Leeds. Unfortunately, Emily did have to turn to sex work due to financial difficulties. Once again, Peter Sutcliffe did use a hammer to knock Emily out. He then used a screwdriver and struck her over 41 times in the neck, the chest and the abdomen. He then proceeded to stomp on her thigh, which left a boot imprint, which the police then did use to try and find the culprit. However, the boot imprint was not enough and he ended up getting away with it. And between this murder and his next murder, he did commit another assault on a woman called Marcella. On May 9th, Marcella Claxon was walking home from a party alone and was offered a lift by Sutcliffe. She agreed and he was driving her home. Whilst on the car journey, she asked if she could leave the car to go to the bathroom. And while she was doing that, Sutcliffe came behind with a hammer and hit her over the head. He then left, which was odd. He didn't, use a knife or anything to hurt Marcella anymore. She was alive and well after it all, and she lived a great life afterwards. In February 1977, he attacked a woman called Irene Richardson, who was 28 years old. She was from Chapeltown in Leeds. He ended up killing her with multiple blows to the head with a hammer. However, after she did die, he then stabbed her multiple times and mutilated the corpse. His tyre tracks were left at the scene, which then helped the police to narrow down a list of suspects. It may have been a bit difficult for the police to narrow down who it was due to the fact that Peter Sutcliffe was a truck driver. Sutcliffe was employed by T&WH Clark, which was a large distributing company where he was a HGV driver. This would have made it very easy for Sutcliffe to drive around Yorkshire and not be a main suspect, as he was not living in any of these cities while he was attacking these women. 2 months later, after the attack of Irene, he attacked another woman on April 23rd. There wasn't a lot of information on the next couple of crimes he did commit, but I will tell you as much as I could find. The next woman he did attack was a woman called Patricia Atkinson. He killed Patricia in her flat in Bradford. However, while he was there, he did leave boot prints on her bedding, which again helped the police to narrow down the results. 2 months after that, on the 26th of June, he did attack again. He attacked 16-year-old Jane MacDonald in Chapeltown, Leeds. And this attack was a little different, as Jane was not a sex worker in any way. And when this came out to the public, everyone started to panic, as it just showed that every woman was in danger of this serial killer. A month later, in July, Peter Sutcliffe did attack another woman called Maureen, and Maureen was 42 years old. She was attacked with the hammer again, but luckily enough she did survive. And unfortunately there was a step forward in the case, but the man who identified the car actually misidentified the car. So the police did do a massive search on thousands of cars, but no results came up because it wasn't the correct kind of car. So that was a little step back for the police, which meant that Sutcliffe could carry on his wicked ways. October 1977, he killed another woman called Jean Jordan, who was only 20 years old. Her body was not found until 10 days after she was murdered, and it was proven that her body was moved several days after her murder so the police could actually find her. However, this case did crack open a new part of the case for the police, as when they recovered Jean's handbag, they found that he did pay her with a brand new £5 note. Now, this note was tracked all the way back to Shipley and Bingley, where Peter Sutcliffe was living, and it was proven that only a couple of thousand employees were paid with this brand new note, which then reduced the list even further. So this case did help the investigation so much. However, after that, 5,000 men were suspected and interviewed about the murders, including Sutcliffe. However, he was not connected to them at all and was able to evade capture again. It was later revealed that Sutcliffe did know that the £5 note would lead to his capture, so he actually went back to the body, which is probably why she was moved. He was looking for the handbag, but he couldn't find it. And while he was there, he started mutilating Jean's body even more. He tried to remove her head with a broken piece of glass, as well as using a hacksaw. Sutcliffe then attacked another woman in December. Her name was Marilyn Moore, and she was 25 years old. She survived the attack, and luckily enough, the police were able to ask her about her attacker, and she gave a really in-depth description about the man who did attack her. Tire tracks were found at the scene, and the tire tracks did match the ones that were found at the previous crime scene, and again this helped the police narrow down the list of suspects. However, even after all of this information and all of the evidence, the police did decide to disband the search for whoever gave the woman the £5 note, as it just came up with no answers. Even though Sutcliffe was questioned, he was not charged, and he would be questioned a few times by the police, who called themselves the Ripper Squad, which I find an absolutely amazing name, and these people did question him multiple times. However, nothing could be pinned to him. He was very good at talking his way around questions and was able to give alibis for everything. In January, Peter Sutcliffe did attack another woman called Yvonne. Yvonne Pearson was 21 years old and was killed in Bradford. Her body was discarded under a sofa that was left on the side of the road, and she was not found until 3 months after her murder. He also killed another woman in January called Helen Ratker. She was 18 years old, and she was not found until 3 days after her murder. After Helen, he attacked 2 months later with a woman called Vera. Vera Millward was attacked in the parking lot of the Royal Infirmary Hospital in Manchester. She was 40 years old when she was killed. On April 4th, 1979, he attacked another woman called Josephine Whittaker, who was only 19 years old. And unlike the rest of the other women, bar the 16-year-old, she was also not a sex worker. Josephine was a bank clerk. Josephine was a bank clerk in Halifax. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit tricky, as the police started receiving hoax letters and tapes of someone pretending to be the Yorkshire Ripper. At this time as well, the hoaxer did send in some letters to the superintendent at the police force. Now, these started to depict a crime of a woman called Joan Harrison, who unfortunately was not killed by Sutcliffe but was killed by a copycat killer, which was then starting to muddle up the case and made things a lot more difficult for the police. Unfortunately, it wasn't until 2005 that they did find the copycat killer and the hoaxer His name was John Humble. He was arrested on perverting the cause of justice and also sending in the hoaxed letters, going back to Peter Sutcliffe in 1979. Barbara Leach was a 20-year-old student from Bradford, and she was murdered in September 11th, 1979. At this time there was also another attack on another woman who did survive. However, I couldn't find any information about this, so just know that we're on about 6 attacks now to 11 murders. However, at this point, Peter Sutcliffe was questioned again. Peter Sutcliffe did match the £5 note lead that they had. They also used forensics on him and he did match. However, for some reason, they released Peter Sutcliffe at this time and he was not charged. In total, Peter Sutcliffe was brought in and questioned by the police a total of 9 times before his capture. Now we're going to go to 1980, where he did commit his last 2 murders. Peter Sutcliffe was actually arrested for drunk driving in early 1980, but while he was waiting for his trial is when he committed his last 2 murders. In August 1980, Marguerite Walls was killed and she was only 47 years old. A few months later, in November, he would kill his last victim, a woman called Jacqueline Hill, who was 20 years old. However, in this time, he did attack another 2 women who did end up surviving. Upadhyaya Bandra was 32 years old, and she was attacked in Leeds and was left for dead. He also attacked 16-year-old Teresa Sykes in Huddersfield. She also survived from her injuries. After all of this, in November, it was actually Sutcliffe's friends who reported him to the police as a suspect. And after everything they'd done and the 9 times they had questioned him and the matching of the forensics and the £5 note, he was considered one of the lead suspects. However, it wasn't until 1987, on July 2nd, when Peter Sutcliffe was pulled up in his car. He was pulled over with a 24-year-old sex worker called Olivia in Broomhill, Sheffield. Now, this is where it gets close to home, as I actually do work in Sheffield. I never knew that this is where he was caught. So when I was reading this, I was really shocked. I was like, why didn't I know this? I am an absolute true crime fanatic and this absolutely shocked me. But he was pulled over in a parking lot at a trade centre in Broomhill. He was actually arrested for having false number plates on his car, which he was then asked to get out of the car and answer some questions. Peter Sutcliffe was taken to Dewsbury Police Station where they questioned him about the false number plates. But whilst he was there, they noticed that he matched so many of the Ripper's characteristics. Not only that, they brought into the fact that his friends did report him as a suspect and all of the forensic evidence. So they decided to go back to the scene of his arrest. While he was being questioned by the police about the false number plates in Sheffield, he said he was bursting for a pee. So when the police went back to the arrest scene, they did check the toilet. And in the centrine, I think is how you pronounce it, like the back part of the toilet, they found a discarded bag. And in this bag, they found a hammer, a knife, and some rope. So it was pretty obvious that he was the killer. He was obviously trying to find a way to kill Olive, the 24-year-old sex worker he did have in his car. So it was lucky that she made an escape before that could happen. They actually did a strip search of Sutcliffe after all this evidence was found, and it was shown that he had padding in his knees and his elbows, which would have protected them while he was murdering the women. So that again kind of proved that he was the murderer. After many days of questioning, on the 4th of January, Sutcliffe admitted that he was the murderer and said he murdered all of the women. So he confessed to everything. A few weeks later, he did claim that God had told him to kill all of these women, and that was his main defense. At his trial, Sutcliffe pleaded not guilty to the 13 counts of murder. However, he did plead guilty to manslaughter on account of diminished responsibility, which means he was not aware of his crimes, really. It kind of matches the innocent on terms of insanity. It kind of matches that. So he pled guilty to manslaughter on terms of diminished responsibility. He claimed that whilst he was working as a grave digger at the age of 15 upwards is where he started hearing voices, and these voices came from a grave of a Polish man who he then said were the voices of God, and therefore he was not fully responsible for the murders, as them voices were the ones that told him to kill. The trial lasted 2 weeks, and even though the defense tried to get diminished responsibility, he was charged with murder and was ordered to serve 20 concurrent sentences of life imprisonment. At the trial, the judge said that he hoped Sutcliffe would never get out of prison, and said he wouldn't be able to have parole until 30 years after he was sentenced, which means he wouldn't be eligible for parole until 2011, where he would be 65 years old. However, on the 16th of July 2010, Peter Sutcliffe was issued a whole life tariff from the High Court, which means that he will be in prison until his death. So that means it's very unlikely that he will ever be released from prison. He is currently still serving his sentence and is 74 years old. And that is the end of this week's episode. I hope you liked it. I hope that you feel glad that this man will never get out of prison alive. I know I am, even though he is 74. The police did say that he was beyond redemption, so I do believe that he is possibly still dangerous if he was allowed out. So I am very glad that this man is still in jail. Well, that is the end of this week's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave a big thumbs up if you did like this week's episode, and subscribe if you want to see more of my face. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye bye!